friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 4th of December of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. The talks between the United States of America and the Russian Federation ended, and just now, just today, we start receiving real updates, real proofs, and real let's say things that can confirm that can give us additional updates and details about the consequences of those talks. Now it's clear that Ukraine hasn't won anything from those talks, and it was, let's say, it was something that we expected. But when talking about the Russian Federation, of course, Russians managed to get lots of benefits from talks with the Russian Federation. We're not talking just about some diplomatic roads that were established or improved between Russia and the United States of America. First of all, we're talking about probably financial markets, because you know that based on the reports of talks between Russia and the United States of America, based on rumors and talks and updates about normalization of relations between Russia and the United States of America, we see that the Russian financial markets are getting stronger and stronger, which is very important for the Russian Federation, very important to get additional money to supply and support the special military operation. We can see that the United States of America got a lot of benefits from those talks. First of all, the United States of America currently has possibilities and has let's say base that they can use to escape or to quit the Ukrainian conflict without consequences, and the most important, without reputational consequences for the United States of America, for the Republican Party, and for the President of the United States of America himself. For example, Trump today stated, of course, he is not very happy. We can see this on this video. He's not happy, but maybe he's not happy not because of Ukraine or the Russian Federation. Maybe he has different issues on different, let's say, matters. But for example, in this video, we can see that Trump said that U.S. delegation's meeting with Putin in Moscow went well, and these words are very important. Furthermore, he added, and this is probably the most important statement, that the settlement conditions for Ukraine has significantly worsened since his meeting with Zelensky. You know, when I was in this office, I talked about the lack of bargaining chips. I told Zelensky, you don't have any cards, that's when we should have negotiated. That was a much better time for a settlement. If you remember, this is the President of the United States of America is talking about meeting with Zelensky that took place several months ago when Zelensky came without suit. So this is the situation, and we see that Russia and the United States of America got benefits from talks and Ukraine didn't get anything. At the same time, we continue receiving different updates from the Russian Federation. The president of Russia today fled to India, and currently he has meeting with the Indian Prime Minister Modi. And during this meeting, Vladimir Putin made lots of very interesting statements, not during but before the meeting. So let's discuss these key points because they are very important. The president of the Russian Federation stated that Russia will liberate Donbass and Novorossiya in any case, whether military or otherwise. Russia disagrees with some points of the US peace proposal for Ukraine, but this is a complex work. The US proposed breaking the 28 point of its peace plan into 4 packages and discussing them in this format. Russia has no intention of returning to the G8. The G7's share of the global economy is shrinking like shagrin leather year after year. The meeting with Witkoff and Kushner was very useful. It lasted a long time, as we had to go over every point of the peace proposals. The proposals Witkoff and Kushner brought are based on previous discussions with Trump. Trump is seeking consensus on the Ukrainian settlement, but this is not an easy task. Russia proposed that Ukraine withdraw its troops from Donbass and not initiate military action, but Kiev prefers to fight. Europeans should get involved in the Ukrainian peace process, not interfere. So these are the statements of Putin, and as we understand, the most most important one is that Russia will take Donbas and Novorossiya in any case, whether military or otherwise. And you know that today we start receiving lots of very interesting updates from Ukraine. For example, today several independent sources reported that the Russians began concentrating of their forces in the Chernihiv direction. So some sources stated maybe in coming days or maybe in coming months, the Russians may start another offensive operation, and this time in the Chernihiv direction, with the purpose probably to get as close as possible to the city of Kiev or to attack Ukraine from behind. So we're not saying that this offensive is going to start tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Most likely this offensive will begin probably after the end even of the battle for the city of Orekhov, so 3-4 months or so. But this is a very interesting piece of news, which means that the Russians during this period of time were not just attacking positions of Ukrainian forces through the front line. The Russians were concentrating additional forces and were preparing for additional army for its separate tasks.
Is the new bearskin hoodie worth it? I got one and tested it out so you don't have to. This fleece is thick.
Another important piece of news is that the president of France came today to China, where he had meeting with the leader of China, and the president of France, Macron, was talking with him about the situation in Ukraine as well. And the president of France was asking just about one thing. The president of France was asking the president of China, Xi Jinping, to ask Putin not to attack energy infrastructure through the territory of Ukraine during the winter period of time. So let's discuss this. Macron proposes moratorium on Russian strikes on Ukraine's energy sector at meeting with Chinese leader. I hope that China will join our call and our efforts to achieve at least a ceasefire in the form of moratorium on strikes on critical infrastructure as soon as possible. This is of key importance for the coming winter, as today Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, including energy infrastructure, is still under Russian fire. We can work together to achieve a just and lasting peace that respects international law. That was stated by Macron. Xi Jinping supported Macron, saying that as for the Ukrainian crisis, the Chinese side supports all efforts aimed at achieving peace, hopes that all parties, through dialogue and negotiations, will be able to reach a just, lasting, binding, and mutually acceptable peace agreement, and will continue to play a constructive role in the political settlement of the crisis. So this is an official part of the meeting between Macron and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping on this matter. But we believe that the question was the conversation was the following. The president of France, Macron, came to China and he told him that if Russia continue attacking and bombing energy infrastructure of the territory of Ukraine, then France and special forces and different, let's say, sides through the world will continue destroying the Russian shadow fleet, which also China uses for its, let's say, purposes to get fuel and cheap oil from the Russian Federation using ports and using sea. So this is something like an ultimatum that was issued by Macron through Xi Jinping to Russia and to the president of the Russian Federation. Because if you remember, a few days ago, the president of France, Macron, stated that Russia in coming days will face significant problems with finance of the special military operation. And during the previous days, we got lots of updates of how somebody was destroying or attacking vessels that, according to different sources, belonged to the Russian shadow fleet. So we believe that this is exactly the message that was sent by Macron to the president of the Russian Federation through Xi Jinping. So let's wait and see what is going to happen. Obviously, this is a very interesting situation, and another interesting point that the Russians attacked the territory of Ukraine with missiles and drones long time ago. So we're talking about massive attack through the territory of Ukraine, which means that the Russians most likely are ready to launch another attack, and any next attack carried out by Russians can be the last attack for the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. So that is why Zelensky and Macron are in a hurry trying to convince Putin not to do this, and if he doesn't do this, they will not attack the Russian shadow fleet. So we believe that this is exactly the scheme and this is exactly what is happening. because you know that the European Union, neither the European Union nor the NATO countries are able to bring down Russian drones and missiles. And for example, today this information was confirmed by Hexet, the minister, the Secretary of Minister of War. He stated that we cannot afford to shoot down cheap drones with 2 million missiles. Hexet explains the US needs to catch up with when it comes to drones. So this is the answer. This is the simple answer to demands and requests from Ukrainian side. The United States of America cannot bring down 500 drones, $500 drones with 2 million missiles or something like this. So that is why the United States of America will not support Ukraine with missiles for these purposes, because it's too expensive, and this is completely irrational for the United States of America from the finance and economy perspective. So that is why we see this ultimatum from Macron to the Russian Federation. Zelensky at the same time also continue having and suffering problems in Ukraine. For example, today several authorities, high-ranked officers, government officers of Ukraine stated that Kiev rejects any compromises on Ukraine's sovereignty and forced border changes, says the Ukrainian foreign minister. CB has stated that following a meeting of NATO foreign ministers and the alliance's foreign ministers supported this position. So we see that Ukraine continue rejecting any proposals regarding this peaceful settlement of the conflict based on the Russian demands. But from the other side, we got report that Ukrainian delegation was invited to the United States of America. Americans positively assess talks with Putin, says Foreign Minister Andrei Sibiga. So most likely Ukrainians will get additional updates or additional, let's say, points about talks between Russia and the United States of America, and they will be given a decision or a chance or let's say position to make a decision to accept or to continue the special military operation, but most likely this time without support of the United States of America. Now let's move further and let's talk about the situation on the ground. And first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Russians continued their offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours we haven't received much changes, but we have lots of updates. First of all, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions in the area of the settlement of Varvarovka. Today this information was provided by different neutral mappers, and according to these changes, the armed forces of the Russian Federation answered the northern part of the settlement of Varvarovka, which means that the assault on the settlement has begun. Another important thing is that Russians, probably 3 or 4 days in a row, are publishing videos where we can see the defense layer and the Zaporizhzhia wall defense layer. So this is the video that we have already seen. We discussed this video two days ago on the 2nd of December, and if you remember, we were talking about this video, about the first part of the video, where we can see the engineering constructions and defense, the Zaporizhzhia defense layer, and the Russians are trying to point our attention to this matter. The Russians are trying to show us the defense layer that was created by the Ukrainians, and it's like the Russians are trying to tell us, just take a look at the defense layer that we, the Russians, the group of forces East, are going to break through. It's like the Russians are trying to tell us that this is the last defense layer, and if we are able and if we break through this defense layer, then the days for the siege of Zaporizhzhia will be counted. And you know that today Russians published another video on the same topic. The Russians were showing the Zaporizhzhia direction, the R85 line, the Gaichul River line, the let's say Zaporizhzhia wall layer, and here we can see another big long video, 1 minute's length, where we can see strongholds, fortifications, trenches, barbed wire through the entire R85 road. And it's the same story. The Russians are trying to tell us and to show us what kind of defense layer they are tasked to capture and to break through. So the Russians, as you can see from the other side, carry out reconnaissance operation, and they're, let's say, probably trying to get themselves ready before beginning of their major offensive. At the same time, the Russians increase their pressure on the city of Gulay-Pole itself. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos of how Russians continued reducing to ruins the city of Gulay-Pole with with deviation. All these videos, all these updates on the matter of the siege of Guliapolya tell us just about one thing. The Russians are tasked to take under control the siege of Guliapolya, and this is not the only task. The Russians are tasked not just to take, but to capture the siege of Guliapolya as fast as possible. So, and this is a very difficult and hard task for the Russians, but if they can do this, then obviously Russia will get the strongest cards ever in the negotiation process with Ukraine. Now let's move further, and a few words about the Novopavlovka-Ivanovka direction. If you remember, a few days ago we talked about the pro-Ukrainian source update on the matter of the situation in this area. I would like to remind you that pro-Ukrainian sources a few days ago published an article. According to, not just an article, they published some changes on their maps, and according to them, the Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, managed to recapture the settlement of Ivanovka completely, and they colored the territory of the village under complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. If you remember, this happened on the 30th of November, and I told you that as of then, we would continue waiting for updates until we get more proofs about the situation. Later, a few days later, on the 2nd of December, the information about the settlement of Ivanovka was also confirmed by neutral mappers. And if you remember, I told you that we believe that that coloring of the map took place because of meeting between Zelensky and Macron, where Zelensky just tried to have at least a media victory, and he shown this progress on the ground just to improve his negotiation positions with Macron. So we believe that that was the case. And for example, today on the 4th of December of 2025, pro-Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see how Ukrainians were fighting with Russians, let's say, along the city limits of the city of Ivanovka, not in the central part, not in the southern part, but basically along the line of combat contact. So despite different updates that we got recently, we have received recently, we still continue receiving clashes along the line of combat contact, which means that most likely we were right and were correct when we were saying that report about the settlement of Ivanovka was just a media victory and media, let's say, counter-offensive operation from the Ukrainian side. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk agglomeration. So during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very important updates. First of all, we currently have a huge gap between updates and the configuration of the map according to pro-Russian and neutral sources and with Ukrainian sources. For example, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians are still very far from the current line of combat contact from the city of Mirnograd and the city of Pokrovsk. So this is the update that today was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, that the Russians, according to these changes, just answered the settlement of Novoekonomichne from the south, which is obviously a strange thing that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources. Furthermore, today the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine published a very interesting article on the matter of the situation on the ground, and the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, for their presentation and for their article, published this map, this picture. So as you can see, according to this picture that was officially used by the General Staff of Ukraine, the Russians still haven't answered both the cities of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. So both the city of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, according to the map that was provided by the General Staff of Ukraine, are under complete and probably unconditional control of the armed forces of Ukraine. So, and obviously this is a very weird thing, and telling the truth, today lots of pro-Ukrainian sources probably made lots of bad statements and made lots of bad comments on this matter, saying that it's something unacceptable, that because it's obviously a lie and the situation must be changed. So this is the situation with the gap between pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian sources. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive along the city limits of Mirnograd. During the previous 24 hours, Russian soldiers were recorded on the territory of the settlement of Rivne. Here we can see Russian stormtroopers that were moving from one building to another, trying to clear the territory. Based on this video, we have adjusted the western part part of the village of Rivne. Furthermore, in this video to the north of the city of Mirnograd, we can see Russians around the fish ponds moving through this area, another pair of Russian, let's say, stormtroopers, and based on this video, we adjusted this part of the Mirnograd agglomeration. So based on these two videos, we can see that the news around the city of Mirnograd is tightening. At the same time, we continue receiving updates and reports from the settlement of Grishna. During the previous 24 hours, several pro-Russian sources adjusted their maps in this area. So as of the end of the 4th of December of 2025, we see that the Russians managed to secure and to capture the southeastern part of the settlement of Grishna completely, and now Russians enter the central part of the city, which means that Ukrainians are falling back under the pressure of the armed forces of Ukraine, which is a very difficult and even a critical situation for the armed forces of Ukraine. As for the Brapolye direction, during the previous 24 hours, several pro-Russian sources stated that the Russians managed to break through Ukrainian defense, to ruin or to break Ukrainian resistance, and to force Ukrainians to fall back from the villages of Taretsk and Sofiivka. This information was published today by pro-Russian sources. As for the village of Sofiivka, now it's under control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation for more than 80%. As for the settlement of Taretsk, the Russians just answered the settlement from the south. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka area. During the previous 24 hours, we received small changes. We will not watch the video due to, let's say, violence and casualties. This is the situation by the end of the 3rd of December. This is the 4th of December. The Russians managed to establish complete control, almost complete control over the Ulitsa Taretska between the settlements of Ivanopol and Konstantinovka, and Russians continue advancing. As for the Sivers direction, during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates. As you can see, we have the biggest number of icons that describes and shows us different attacks with FPV drones on Ukrainian vehicles, positions, and infantry exactly from this area. Lots of updates, dozens of icons that were geolocated and hundreds of them that haven't been geolocated. As for the changes on the ground, the most important updates are coming from the settlement of Svyatopokrovska. During the previous 12 hours, according to pro-Russian and neutral mappers, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to improve their positions. I would like to remind you that just yesterday we discussed this video, and here we could see how Russians, as we discussed, were trying to convince Ukrainians to surrender, that were hiding on the basement, and the Russian soldier managed to do this. He forced Ukrainians to surrender. In the final part of this video, we could see how Ukrainians were leaving the basement and surrendering to this Russian soldier. And based on this video yesterday, we adjusted the most southeastern part of the settlement. Today we received additional changes. According to different mappers, the Russians continue advancing, and currently Russians control up to 50 or even more percent of the settlement of Svyatopokrovska, and the Ukrainians continue falling back further in the western direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos how Russians were attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the western part of the settlement, trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area completely. So we believe that in coming days Ukraine will lose the settlement of Svyatopokrovska, but as you can see, Ukrainians still control this dense network of the fortification that is located on the elevation to the north of the Svyatopokrovska, and Ukrainians most likely still control strongholds along the river of Bakhmutka, which is located to the south of Svyatopokrovska. But from these positions, Russians will be able to attack this stronghold from behind and to force Ukrainians to fall back. The loss of strongholds to the south of Svyatopokrovska and to the north of Fedorovka, we're talking about this territory, will allow the Russians to break through Ukrainian defense and to answer the Slaviansk operational space. And from these positions, Russians will be able to continue advancing further in the northwestern direction towards the settlement of Raya Alexandrovka. As of the city of Siversk, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just a lot of videos of how Russians were attacking different positions of Ukrainians through the city of Siversk, mainly in its western part. As for the Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, the main updates, most of the updates came to us from the triangle of the villages of Dibrova, Ozerna, and Yampol. So Russians continue offensive operation in this area, and according to neutral mappers and pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly on the territory of Ozerno, and it seems that the village is about to be captured by Russians, and Russians improve their positions in the area of Dubrova. This information, we can find the confirmation of this report based on the gray zone that was expanded by pro-Ukrainian mappers in this area. As for the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours, nothing special happened. Just would like to remind you that several days ago, the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, probably yesterday or the day before yesterday, he stated that the Russian military promised to secure the city of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy within the next 2 days. So according to the statement, tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, Russians will announce complete control over the settlement, and then we will adjust the map. As for the Kharkiv direction, the Russians are finishing the battle for the settlement of Vilcha. The settlement is under very heavy fire from the Russian side. Ukrainians are about to fall back from this area because they are staying there without support. And this is the situation. And once again, I would like to point to attention that starting of the 4th of December of 2025, we began receiving lots of updates that the Russians currently are concentrating their troops in the Chernigov direction. So this offensive might happen in coming days. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.